Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Adventures in Advising podcast. On today's episode, we have a returning guest, and that is to celebrate and remember the life of Dr. Terry O'Banion, an individual considered as a visionary leader who challenged those in higher education to place student learning at the center of their mission. I'm Matt Markin, along with Ryan Scheckel. Ryan, what's this episode mean to you?
Well, for somebody who started advising what feels like so long ago, there was always longer ago in my framework. Whether it was attending a conference, reading something in the scholarship of academic advising, there was always presented to us this sort of starting point. And that starting point included Terry O'Banion's work. Just personally, it's a little bittersweet why we're talking about it now and how we're going to be discussing it. But it's also it's just so enriching, so encouraging to think about this heritage and really ultimately the influence that any one person can have on such larger conversations. So it's like a lot of things in life. It's what you bring to it, and it's got many facets. But I'm excited to talk with our guest today.
And according to the TerryO'BanionPapers.com, Terry was, quote, one of the most prolific and provocative writers in the history of the community college movement. His legacy lives on through more than 300 publications that continue to shape the field and inspire new generations of educators and leaders. We know Terry had various roles over the decades. And we have our guest today, and let's go ahead and bring that person on. And that is Dr. Wendy Troxel. Wendy, how are you?
Really good. Hi, Matt. Hi, Ryan. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah. And, returning guest, Dr. Wendy Troxel, so director of the NACADA Center for Research and Academic Advising and Student Success over at Kansas State University. And Wendy, I'm going to just kind of also mention, now that we have you on, that prior to Terry's passing, you and I had been trying to hopefully plan having you guest host an episode of the Adventures in Advising podcast to actually interview Terry. And I know you had been doing so much extensive research, developing questions. You had been communicating with Terry to really try to have that awe-inspiring interview. And I thought maybe this first question to throw at you would be, what were maybe some of those conversations that you had with him, and anything that stood out the most to you?
Yeah, it's crazy timing, of this. I mean, I certainly have cited him for years, and I advise doctoral students who cite him in everything. And so he had reached out to me when the new website came up, the O'Banion Papers website came up to let us know it was there. This was a year and a half ago or so, and so he and I had been kind of virtually connecting, and then when y'all had the idea of an interview with him, I was really excited. I had never met him other than virtually over emails and such. And so probably 3 months ago or so, he and I got together on Zoom, and I met him for the first time in 2D at least. And we had just this really fun conversation for a little over an hour. We just kind of kept talking and talking. And I said at the time, like, well, you might want to save some of this stuff for for our recording. And he was a little nervous about it, as he had some health issues, and just wanted to be sharp and wanted to be brilliant and delightful and prolific as and he was certainly with me. So we had it scheduled, didn't we? We had the interview scheduled, and he had reached out and said he just wasn't doing well and wasn't feeling well. And so when I learned that he had passed away, it was a real blow, and just so thankful that I had gotten the opportunity to chat with him. So we really talked about kind of how he got into all this, what was the impetus for his writing, because he really didn't write that much in the academic advising area. I mean, he was, certainly just incredibly productive especially in the community college leadership area. And I hope that listeners go to the terryobanyanpapers.com and just see the extent of writing. I find nuggets in everything that I read of his, even if it's not specifically about academic advising. But one of the first things we talked about, there are a couple of things I want to get to at some point. First is the new terms these days about the holistic advising, for example. Sorry, I'm going to be bold. I'm just like, you know, old wine in new bottles. And I just keep saying, the developmental advising was fully explored decades ago. And so he and Burns Crookston are usually cited together. So about 1972, they both put out what is often cited. And Crookston's was called A Developmental View of Academic Advising as Teaching, and O'Banion's was An Academic Advising Model. And he started to laugh. And so I was asking him about, what do you think about this holistic term, this term holistic advising? And developmental Crookston, O'Banion. He's like, I never met Burns Crookston. He had never met him once, never talked to him, never collaborated with him or anything. So it's so interesting. He used to find it fascinating that they were just linked in every dissertation and every lit review kind of thing. And so then we really started talking about, how he got into the advising space, and he used the term that many of us use. He's actually the quote, "I stumbled into academic advising." And so, yeah, nothing new under the sun these days. And so he was dean of students at Central Florida Community College. It was called junior college at that time, starting in about 1960. And he was there for many years and was a faculty member as well. And so he got intrigued by the first book on faculty advising was by Melvine Hardy in 1970. And Ryan, we were talking about the advising model article that has been reprinted in the NACADA Journal multiple times. Most recently, I think the 1994 one is most recent, and there aren't any references at the end of that, which is kind of interesting. I didn't really notice that till you said that. But he talked a lot about that book. He talked a lot about that faculty advising book. And he was also kind of a psychologist, and had a sociologist brain. And so what he talked about was the conversations that faculty members and staff members, mostly faculty at that point when he was doing it, what the nature of those conversations was what got him really interested in digging deeper into this area. And even then, there was an emerging trend to having staff members hired for the role. And so he really thought about this kind of humanistic approach to working with students. And so he was also really interested in how faculty members especially and staff members are trained for the role, how they get professional development. So he did an experiment. He got a grant really early on and did an experiment about different advising structures. And he worked with faculty with no training in advising, faculty who were trained in advising related elements, and then he had a group of both. And then he worked with students, and he said that he assessed satisfaction along the way, and we talked about satisfaction as a construct. But he was really interested in the nature of those conversations, and he talked about just one more thing, and then I'll get to questions, because I'm just kind of getting the dump of the initial part of our conversation. But he talked about working with students in a humanistic way. He said, I had a humanistic approach to talking with my advisees. And he asked every student 3 questions. Who am I? To reflect on these. Who am I? Where am I going? What difference does it make anyway? And he thought that those three questions to get students to reflect on their personal values, goals, visions, dreams was a really important beginning of any advising conversation. And in his 5-step model, you see that the goal setting stuff is front loaded, which is where it should be. Then program choice, course choice follows from there. And so he said, he said, as we know from the literature, and I tell this all the time, academic relationships matter to students, and it's really evident in the more frequent conversations that any faculty or staff member has with students, which is the advising relationship.
For sure. And we've talked a little bit about this. I don't know. It's sometimes referred to as the parallax effect, or a dolly zoom in the movie industry, where it feels like in one moment you're moving both backward and forward. And I think it's inherent in the experience of academic advising, the way that we talk through these things, but especially when you engage the scholarship of advising, that some of these topics have been around forever because we're talking about people learning at institutions. But there's a kind of simplicity in that 1972 article that I think is reflective of the era. And I was wondering if, especially given your perspective, Wendy, in talking with somebody who's like a new scholar now, or somebody who's been in advising, say, for the last decade, and then also talking with somebody who had been around the advising conversation since the 1970s. Do you feel like that simplicity is just our perspective from now, or do we feel like it was there then?
Interesting. There's another really good article in the NACADA Journal that I had forgotten about until I kind of re-looked it up, by Tom Greitz, in 2013. It's volume 33, number 1, where he really, Tom documented the rise of developmental advising and its difference from prescriptive, for example. And I do think that around that time, with the student personnel point of view document, and at the time, so this is right after civil rights movement, or really in the heart of it. We're still, there's still conflict, major conflict in the world, that this idea of whole student, I think it was provocative from an academic point of view. And so I think there was a lot of, and others, experts can certainly correct me on this, but I think there was starting to be this separation of the faculty world and the staff world and student affairs and the classroom, the out of classroom experience and all that. And I really took the psychologists, sociologists, social psychologists, social worker, all that, to kind of remind us about the complexity, really the complexity of the student journey, especially right out of high school, 18-year-old brains and such. But I think when scholars started writing about it and acknowledging and validating it, I think that was relatively new. It was kind of, I love the concept of the unthought known. It's like something that's, you hear and you go like, well, yeah, duh, yeah, yes, of course, that's pretty simple. But until you kind of play it out, unpack it, it remains uninterrogated, I guess. And so I think it certainly is still simple today, but I mean, I'm at universities all the time, in my role, where I ask them the question that he asked, what, 50 some years ago now? What is academic advising at your institution? And he talks in many places about, that those conversations only come from the philosophy of the institution about what this conversation is and what this role is. And so it's frustratingly simple, I think, you know, and we've tried to make it pretty complex. But to your point, I do think at the time it was so, and the fact that multiple people were writing about it in the same couple of years meant that something pretty significant motivated it.
Yeah, and you're mentioning about, Terry asking that question to institutions, and in your role, you're visiting institutions, you're helping them out. I mean, how do you think institutions might be able to maybe honor his vision in ways that are practical and relevant today?
Have a philosophy statement. State what it is, like state it out loud on paper, on a website, document it, and have it come from collaborative conversations with those who are both closely and tangentially involved. I mean that's all he asked, was that you consider, that the institution consider what this role is and land on it, and that those who did the role, practiced the role, took it seriously, and that there's a literature base behind it, there's a pedagogy to it, and it matters. It matters for persistence and ultimately the binary that is retention and success down the line.
Well, we were thinking a little bit about the listener to this podcast and their familiarity or perhaps lack thereof of the way that we consider the scholarship of academic advising,
Mm.
the way it's presented to us, and I'd say that the relative complexity at this
Mm-hmm.
point, the multiplicity of views. So for somebody who's like looking to dip into this this conversation, maybe for the first time, read something from possibly 50 years ago or whatever, is there anything in Terry's work that you particularly want to draw anyone's attention to that you feel really still resonates today in our context?
I got a copy of, and I asked him about this, and he laughed. He couldn't stop laughing. So he did a monograph in 2016 that was published by the League for Innovation in the Community College, along with the National American University. And the title is Bread and Roses, Helping Students Make a Good Living and Live a Good Life. And he said that is the one I'm most proud of. He said that of all of the things that he's ever written, he loved that the most. He was so focused on the student at the center and academic relationships, whether it's an advisor or whoever else a student connects with, that helps a student understand the context of this decision to go into higher education. And he certainly was a believer in kind of some goal setting, career related goal setting, but his focus on the human and what to kind of balance their visions and dreams and goals beyond the career oriented stuff was really important to him. And so I don't mind the term holistic advising. I actually think it's more appropriate to say that we advise students holistically. So no matter what approach, if you're appreciative or relational or motivational interviewing or developmental or whatever, if we recognize that the student is a whole person and the things that they do and care about and struggle with and celebrate matter in all of it, then yeah, I don't know. So that is I think it's probably available in the O'Banion papers, but I had gotten a hold of it a bit ago, and so that was fun because there's new research out. Actually, I was just at a conference last week, the higher education policy conference, and the Gallup folks did a presentation, and of a pretty major study that they were doing, and with students and parents, the value of higher education. And so I wrote this down. I just want to make sure I have it. The results are that both parents and students acknowledge that getting a college degree is still relevant for helping prepare for a job, a career, or a skill set that helps them get ahead, but they don't necessarily name that job or that career. So that there is preparation, because students these days, and this better than I do, know that the landscape is constantly changing, technological advances, emergence of AI. They don't know what jobs are going to be available and what they're going to look like. But that college helps them prepare for a job, a career, and a skill set, as well as having skills that help them navigate a complex, ever more complex world, is still a value. And that's good to see, and that would make him happy.
But you mentioned a couple of times about like the human element of all of this, and with all these emerging technologies, all these changes, initiatives, priorities shifting, all of that, how do we still convince stakeholders that the human aspect is still important?
Oh, man, if we could figure that out. We've got you may be aware that through the research center, we're doing these little mini research projects, and the current one is on AI and advising. We just are finished step 1 of gathering some evidence, and step 2, if listeners, if you're not in the respondent pool, send me an email, wgtroxel@ksu.edu, get into that respondent pool. And a number of universities last year did a similar kind of study that we're working with, and reading the responses from students. What are the benefits, what are the the challenges of AI in your advising relationship? We asked students this, and some of them said, if I can't use it, they shouldn't be able to use it, first of all. That's what some of them said. But others, they understand the efficiency aspect of it, as long as the information is accurate and correct, like degree audit stuff. But that our students are less confident and less secure than we probably give them credit for, and that they give them credit for. So they do still want to talk with others, with knowledgeable humans who have been around for a little while. I think the tough part is even convincing the students of that. So I talk with a lot of institutions about, how do we get our students to actually come to us, and like, you gotta find creative, compelling ways, to make it compelling for, for them. And so, what an implicit and explicit messaging, is there. But then the other thing is, how do we document the influence of that? How do we make the case to administration? And I think that's the newest practical significant studies that need to be done, is what is the message about the importance of that human contact, and how does it show up, besides, yeah, my advisor's nice, we talked about tomato season, and we talked, what matters in the things that they have goals about their success, about they're figuring out how to navigate things. And so I think we do have to consider, at the institution level, at the unit level, at the department level, how to document those interactions and how to connect it to the intended outcomes of the unit. I mean, if the intended outcome of the unit is we're going to release holds, did you? Yes, no, okay, whatever. But if we need to make the case, which we do, for AI will allow us to do the more important things, to have these conversations, we've got to provide the evidence for that and assess it in some way.
Looking over some of Terry's work from the past, one of the through lines is the technology question. I think just me offering an opinion, the concept of humanistic approach is in direct contrast with the mechanistic approach. So much of the literature post World War II, especially in the United States, was so positivist, logical, bureaucratic, and organized. How do we manage this massive influx of people, the diversity of people, the movement of people, and the transfer and college credit transcript process? Just historically speaking, what Terry and other contemporaries were writing about in the 70s was a response to decades worth of institutions trying to respond to the growth of higher education, particularly in the United States, and losing the point through that process of trying to just manage financial pressures, regulatory pressures, social pressures, and those sorts of things. And we've mentioned it a couple times here, that through his writing, he was in ways controversial or challenging or whatever. I'm thinking of our colleagues listening, and if they want to challenge in similar ways, but perhaps aren't going to get an article published on it, what are some other ways they can challenge these status quos, these influences that are pushing practice and policy and decision making that might be a little bit a shorter step from where they are right now?
One of the things that I really appreciate about where NACADA is headed, and we have had wonderful seasons, is under Dr. Kyle Ross's leadership now. NACADA is going to get more provocative in what we put out, the stands that we're taking as an association. A doctoral student and I are doing the analysis of the first two questions of the month this past summer, which is the caseloads question. So look for an actual, because NACADA has never, you see a number out there, but that's never been a number that NACADA as an association has said is the number. We've never said that because the answer is it depends. What is advising at your institution? So we will have some. One of the reasons for the question of the month series is to come out with some position papers and some research briefs, but really to take a stand on some of these things. And so there will be some new literature coming that will help the sport. Of course, got to have somebody read it. I think where are voices heard at an institute? Whose voices are heard at an institution sometimes has to be a creative strategy to get that in. I often say, if you teach, as a faculty member, if you teach as you were taught, the question is, do you advise as you were advised? And still, many of the academic leaders went to college at a time that it was very different. Advising was very, very different. Fun fact: my freshman advisor was a faculty advisor in my department at my college, and was also my father. So my father he was chair of the music department at Muskingum College and was my first academic advisor. So I had a very humanistic approach, although he kind of he separated the academic with that. Couldn't skip a class. The faculty would narc me out. It was horrible, but no, it was actually wonderful. But there is an increasing number of our wonderful members who are finding ways to tell the story. In an hour, I have a meeting with one of our doctoral students who just got all the way to the president at her institution to tell the story of what the advising interaction means to persistence, retention, credit hours, GPA. And she's got charts and graphs and bullets and numbers, and so I told her recently, I'm like, dude, you got to write this up. Like, we got to write this up. Like, we got to share this with your colleagues, because she had that. How do I tell this story, and have the academic leaders listened to it. It took her a long time to get up through had to go to the dean, then the associate dean, then the dean, then the vice provost, then the provost, then got it all the way to the president, and they're all in. And so they need to see the evidence. We need to see if we're going to take credit for the things that we tend to take credit for. We better be ready to take blame for things that are out of our control. And so focusing on what do we intend for advising to be in this unit, department, college, leads you to the kind of evidence that will help tell that story. And we've got to, get feedback from students and from ancillary places and the collegial collaborative conversations that happen. Getting advisors into curricular meetings, I think, is really important. Getting if you have a university with primary role advisors and faculty advisors, or just primary role advisors, getting them seen as academic professionals is a cultural shift that can help kind of move that toward, oh, you've got expertise here that we need. So I don't know. It's a contextual thing, but it all comes down to what's your evidence that this matters.
Yep. Getting them to the table, what's the evidence, getting that story told, and to maybe kind of bring it full circle. We started with, Wendy, you talking about get to have that conversations with Terry, getting to finally meet him virtually, the research that you were doing and preparing for the interview. Anything else you want to add, or how maybe Terry's maybe has influenced you personally?
As a faculty member, and I read a lot of drafts, and a journal reviewer, I lead a lot of manuscripts, and I always challenge the authors to really think about why they're using sources that are decades old. Update your sources, more current sources, but this is anchor literature. I mean, this is anchor literature. There are a lot of things written these days that started there, and to really critically analyze the connections, the threads in the literature, and to make the case for. Don't be afraid. I would say don't be afraid to go back and read Eric White, advising at the core in the General Education Journal, and Tom Greitz and the original works of Crookston and O'Banion, and Lowenstein, obviously, and Hagen. Just because they're old sources doesn't mean they are out of date. And so talking with him, he reminded me a lot of my dad, who's still alive and still writing. He writes historical fiction. He reminded me a lot of my dad, because I just would love to sit at his knee and just kind of hear his current thoughts about higher education. And he was still in the game. He just a few years ago helped Kansas State University open the Institute or the Department of Community College Leadership. And so he had connections to Kansas State pretty recently, just a few years ago. And so still really churning on the human aspect of this journey that in many ways hasn't changed, and in some really challenging ways has become ever more complex. And so I guess continue to find the threads. Don't just quote Terry O'Banion because your article you just read did. Go back and read the original stuff and reflect on it today, and then write stuff on that.
Awesome. Ryan, anything to wrap us up?
Yeah, I just especially encourage folks who've heard the name but didn't read it. It's so accessible, which for somebody who grew up through the development of the internet age is still a marvel and worth celebrating that we can have that kind of access. But I also know that there are some folks who work at community colleges and often don't feel represented in academic advising conversations. I know that there are people who are in primary faculty or academic staff roles who often don't feel represented in academic advising conversations. And you can find yourself. And it's scholars like Terry O'Banion who you may find that real resonance with if it's not somebody publishing today.
So true. And I could just read one quote from his original. He talks about the process of academic advising. And he says, what is the process of academic advising? Too often, just reflect on where you are today. Programs have been planned on the basis of available personnel, such as faculty, or on the basis of some philosophical rationale that has been shoddily stated, if stated at all. Seldom have programs been constructed and coordinated on the basis of the process or nature of academic advising. What is academic advising at your institution? Stake your claim, write it down, collaboratively agree on it, and then live it out.
Oh, food for thought. Dr. Wendy Troxel, thank you so much for being on the podcast again.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it so much.
Thanks, Wendy.